The scent of pine and roast turkey filled my home, a fragrance I had carefully cultivated for 25 Christmases. It was a scent that held 1,000 memories: the nervous excitement of a young woman decorating her first tree, the joyous chaos of two small children tearing into gifts, the quiet comfort of a shared glance with a husband who knew your every thought. Tonight, that scent was meant to be the backdrop for a perfect evening. My family was all here, their faces glowing under the warm light of the candelabra I had placed on the dining table. My daughter, Chloe, sat across from me, her long brown hair catching the soft light. Beside her was my grandson, Michael, his eyes wide with a boyish wonder that made all the exhaustion of 100 hours of preparation vanish. And then there was Mark, my son-in-law. His presence was less a comfort and more of a condition I had learned to manage for the sake of my daughter's happiness. I, Beatrice, at 50 years old, had meticulously orchestrated this evening. For 3 days, I had been on my feet, baking the same sugar cookies my mother taught me to make, slow roasting a turkey until the meat was ready to fall off the bone, and simmering a gravy that smelled like every happy memory I had ever known. My home, the one I had shared with my dear husband for nearly 30 years, was alive with the spirit of the season. The conversation flowed, a pleasant river of small talk and laughter. I was at the head of the table, the seat my late husband had built with his own 2 hands. It was more than a chair. It was the anchor of our family, a symbol of the home he and I had built together. Everyone knew this. It had been my seat since the day he died 5 years ago. The clinking of silverware on plates was the only sound for a moment as we all savored the meal. Then, like a rogue wave hitting a placid shore, Mark stood up. He was not a small man, and his presence seemed to swallow the light around him. He looked at me, his eyes cold, and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "This seat is for my father, get out." The words hung in the air, a poisonous gas. The room, which moments before had been filled with life and warmth, went silent. Chloe's smile froze on her face. Michael's fork clattered against his plate. Before I could even respond, before I could process the sheer audacity of his words, he shoved me hard. It wasn't a gentle nudge. It was a firm, deliberate push. My balance, not what it once was gone in an instant. I stumbled backward, my feet tangling, my arms flailing for something to hold on to. I caught the edge of the tablecloth, pulling glasses and silverware with me in a chaotic crash as I fell to the hardwood floor. I lay there, a discarded ornament from a Christmas tree that no longer had a place for me. The smell of spilled wine was sharp in the air, mixing with the fading scent of roast turkey. The clatter of a silver fork spinning on the wood was the only sound before it came to a rest. I looked up at a circle of stunned faces. My grandson's eyes were wide with shock. Chloe just stood there, frozen, her face pale, and Mark. He stood by the head of the table, his chest puffed out, looking down at me on the floor of my own home with an expression of pure, unadulterated triumph. The king of a castle he had not built and had just conquered. The ache in my hip was a dull throb, but it was the humiliation that cut deeper. The silence from my family was a thick, heavy blanket of shock, a blanket no one seemed willing to pull away. I saw the horror in Chloe's eyes, but she did nothing. I recognized it for what it was: the same inaction, the same desperate wish to avoid conflict that had paved the road to this very moment. As I lay there, the shock turned into something else, something cold and clear. He thought he had won. He thought I was just a weak old woman. He had no idea that by the time the sun rose on Christmas morning, I would use a single piece of paper to ensure he would wake up homeless, and it would be entirely legal. He had made a grave mistake. He had not pushed a grandmother. He had pushed a button, activating a lifetime of resilience, intelligence, and self-worth that had been lying dormant for far too long. He had no idea what was coming. As I lay on the cold hardwood floor, the smell of spilled wine stinging my nostrils, my grandson's young face etched with worry was the only movement in the paralyzed room. He was the only one who rushed to my side. "Grandma, are you okay?" He whispered, his small hand on my arm. My daughter Chloe stood frozen, her hands clasped to her mouth, a useless painting of horror. Her paralysis was not just shock, it was the same inaction, the same desperate wish to avoid conflict that had paved the road to this very moment. In that instant, the years of small surrenders and quiet dismissals came rushing back, each one a brick in the wall that now stood between us. My mind flashed back to a crisp autumn afternoon last year. Mark needed to borrow my husband's car, a beautiful old Lincoln I had kept in pristine condition. He had an investor meeting he couldn't be late for, and he promised to be careful. He brought it back after dark, parking it in the shadows at the end of the driveway. The next morning I saw it, a deep, cruel dent in the passenger side door, scraped down to the metal. When I approached him, he barely looked up from his coffee. "Some idiot in the parking lot," he said with a shrug. "People don't know how to drive." There was no apology, no offer to fix it. When I pressed him, a flicker of anger crossed his face. "Beat, it's a 20-year-old car. What do you want me to do? It's probably worth more as scrap metal anyway." Later, when I spoke to Chloe, her voice was full of that placating tone I had come to despise. "Mom, he feels terrible about it. He just doesn't show it. Let's not make a big deal out of it. It's just a car." But it was never just a car. It was my husband's car. It was my independence. And they had dented it and dismissed it as worthless. Then there was the vacation. This past spring, the furnace broke. Mark made a great show of being overwhelmed by the repair cost. To keep the peace and to keep my grandson warm, I gave him my emergency credit card. For the furnace and nothing else, I had said, my voice firm. The furnace was fixed. A week later, I was scrolling through my tablet and saw photos of Mark and Chloe smiling, holding cocktails on a white sand beach. The caption read, "A much-needed escape." My heart hammered against my ribs. I printed the credit card statement. The furnace repair was there, followed by 2 round-trip airline tickets to the Bahamas and a 4-night stay at an all-inclusive resort. When I confronted them, Mark had the audacity to act offended. "We were burnt out, Beatrice. We needed a mental health break. Besides, that card barely has a limit. It's not like you use it." Chloe stood beside him, nodding. "We'll pay you back, Mom, we promise." That was 6 months ago. I haven't seen a single dollar. But the worst, the wound that was still raw, was what they did to the living room. It was the heart of my home. Every piece of furniture, every photograph on the wall told a story. The centerpiece was a large, beautifully framed portrait of my husband and me on our wedding day. I remember coming home from a grocery run one afternoon and stopping dead in the doorway. Everything was gone. The comfortable armchair my husband always sat in, the bookcase filled with my favorite novels, the small table that held our family albums. It was all replaced by a cold, gray sofa and a giant black television screen mounted on the wall. I ran through the house, my panic rising. I found my things, my life's treasures, piled in a corner of the damp, musty basement. My wedding portrait was leaning against a stack of old tires. The glass was cracked. When I confronted them, my voice shaking with a rage I rarely felt, Chloe had tears in her eyes. "We wanted to surprise you, Mom, to freshen the place up for you. It's more modern now." Mark stood behind her, arms crossed. "Honestly, Beatrice, it was all just clutter. This is much cleaner, more functional." He said the word clutter as if he were sweeping away dust, not dismantling a life. Lying on the floor now, the smell of wine stinging my nostrils, I saw it all with a blinding clarity. The dented car, the stolen vacation, the desecrated living room, they were not separate incidents. They were a campaign. A slow, methodical effort to diminish me, to erase my presence, to turn my home into their house and my life into a resource for them to drain. This push, this fall, it wasn't just a moment of anger from Mark. It was a declaration, a final shove to get the last bit of me out of their way. I looked from Mark's smug face to Chloe's terrified one. I saw the past, the present, and the future they had planned for me, and a cold resolve settled in my bones. My grandson Michael was the first to move. He rushed to my side, his young face etched with worry. "Grandma, are you okay?" As he helped me sit up, I met my daughter's eyes across the room. She saw something in my face that made her flinch. The woman who had tolerated their disrespect for years was gone. The woman who had fallen was a doormat. But the woman who was about to get back on her feet was someone they had not yet had the displeasure of meeting. My grandson Michael, bless his heart, was the only one who moved. He was the only one who helped me to my feet. He had his father's eyes, but my husband's soul. He kept asking if I was all right, his voice trembling. I couldn't find the words to answer him. I simply patted his hand and allowed him to guide me back to a chair, not my chair, but a side chair away from the head of the table, an observer's chair. The rest of Christmas dinner was a masterclass in denial. Mark's parents, Arthur and Jean, suddenly found that it was much later than they realized. They offered rushed goodbyes, their eyes carefully avoiding mine. My grandson Michael wouldn't eat a bite, his gaze fixed on his plate. Mark, having won his pathetic battle, sat in my husband's chair and ate with a sullen sort of pride, as if daring anyone to challenge him. And Chloe, she tried. She bustled around, offering dessert no one wanted, making cheerful comments that fell flat in the suffocating silence. After Mark's parents left, she came to me, her eyes pleading. Mom, I am so sorry. Mark, he just gets so stressed around the holidays. He didn't mean it. I looked at her, my daughter, and felt nothing. The space inside me that should have been filled with a mother's understanding was just a cold, hollow cavern. I didn't reply. I simply stood up, the ache in my hip a dull throb, and said, I'm very tired. Good night. In my bedroom, I didn't cry. The humiliation was too deep for tears. It felt like a stain, something that had seeped into my very being. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, the festive lights from the neighbor's house painting meaningless patterns on my wall. This room was the last corner of the house that felt truly mine. My books were here. My husband's photograph was on the nightstand, his smile a painful reminder of a time when this house was filled with love, not just obligation. I tried to sleep, but my mind was a churning sea of resentment. Every small slight from the past few years came back to me, sharpened by the evening's brutality. The hours ticked by, 1 in the morning, then 2. My mouth was dry, a desert of unspoken words. I decided to get a glass of water, hoping the simple act might quiet my thoughts. The house was dark and silent as I made my way down the hall. The floorboards, which I knew like the back of my hand, creaked softly under my feet. As I neared the kitchen, I saw a sliver of light from under the door of the guest room, the room that used to be my sewing room, where Mark and Chloe now slept. I heard their voices, low and tense. I didn't mean to listen. I just wanted to pass by to get my water and retreat back into my solitude. But then I heard my name. I froze, my body hidden in the shadows of the hallway. Mark's voice was a venomous whisper. I don't care if she's upset, Chloe. It had to be done. We have to establish who is in charge here. In charge, Mark? You pushed my mother to the floor? Chloe's voice was shaky, a whisper of protest. She'll get over it, she always does. I stood there in the darkness, every muscle in my body tense. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs. She is a stubborn old woman, Mark hissed, and she is in our way. If she doesn't sign over power of attorney by February, I'm done waiting. My dad's lawyer told me what to do. We file for conservatorship. We tell the judge she's getting forgetful, that she's a danger to herself. He said it's easy. Once we have control of her assets, this house is as good as ours. We sell it. We buy a place of our own on the lake, and we put her in a nice, clean facility where she belongs. A nice, clean facility. The words were so sterile, so clinical. A place to store an inconvenient mother. I waited for my daughter to scream, to rage, to defend me. I waited for her to say, "How dare you talk about my mother that way?" But all that came from the room was a weak, whimpering question. But a facility, Mark, what would people think? That was it. Her only objection, not the cruelty, not the betrayal, not the theft of her mother's life and home, just the appearance of it all. What would people think? In that moment, standing in the cold, dark hallway of the home I had built, I realized the truth. My son-in-law was not my only enemy. The betrayal was not his alone. My own daughter was his accomplice. The floor had been ripped out from under me for the second time that night. The pain was a physical thing, a shard of ice piercing my chest. It was the kind of pain that doesn't make you scream. It's the kind that steals the air from your lungs and leaves you perfectly, terrifyingly still. I stood in that dark hallway for what felt like an eternity. The cruel words of my son-in-law echoing in the silent space where loving memories used to live. A nice, clean facility. The phrase was a wrecking ball, demolishing the last standing structures of my affection for them. I did not storm into their room. I did not scream. I did not give them the satisfaction of knowing I had heard. Instead, I did the most difficult thing I have ever had to do. I turned around and with the silence and stealth of a ghost, I walked back to my room. Each step was a quiet declaration of war. My feet made no sound on the floorboards, but in my mind. Each step was a thunderclap, sealing their fate. Back in my sanctuary, I closed the door, the soft click of the latch sounding like a vault being sealed. I did not turn on a light. I sat in the armchair by the window, the one my husband always said had the best view of the morning sun, and I let the pain wash over me. It was a cleansing fire. It burned away the years of hope that Chloe would one day stand up for me. It burned away the excuses I had made for Mark's behavior. It burned away the soft, pliable heart of a mother who had been willing to sacrifice her own peace for her child's happiness. When the flames died down, all that was left was a core of ice. I thought of the words, conservatorship, incompetent, sell the house. For 40 years, I worked as a senior legal secretary. I typed those words. I filed documents with those words. I saw families tear each other apart over those words. I had always viewed those situations with a professional pity, a detached sympathy for strangers. I never imagined, not in my wildest nightmares, that my own daughter would be planning to use them against me. The shock faded and was replaced by a chilling, razor-sharp clarity. They saw me as a problem to be managed, an asset to be liquidated, an obstacle on their path to a house on the lake. They were not just ungrateful, they were predators, and I, in my loving blindness, had been their prey for far too long. I looked at the photograph of my husband on my nightstand. His kind, smiling eyes seemed to look right through me. I was not asking for comfort anymore. I was looking for the strength he always knew I had. He used to call me his steel magnolia, soft on the outside, unbreakable on the inside. I had forgotten that part of myself. Chloe and Mark had certainly never seen it. They were about to. As the first gray light of Christmas morning filtered through my window, a decision settled over me, as calm and final as a winter frost. There would be no more conversations, no more appeals to a love that clearly did not exist. No more setting boundaries they would just trample over. My goal was no longer to fix my family, it was to survive it. I rose from the chair and got dressed. I put on a nice sweater, did my hair, and applied a touch of lipstick armor. When I walked into the living room, they were already there. Chloe was making coffee, her eyes red and puffy. Mark was on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, the arrogant king back on his throne. They both looked up, surprised to see me. They were expecting a weeping, broken old woman. They were not expecting me to walk in and say with a calm, neutral voice, "Merry Christmas, Michael, darling. Shall we see what Santa brought?" The rest of the morning was a surreal performance. I watched my grandson open his gifts with a genuine smile. I watched Chloe hand me a cashmere scarf with trembling hands, her eyes begging for a forgiveness I would never give. I even accepted a gift from Mark, a generic box of chocolates, and thanked him with a politeness that was colder than any winter storm. They were confused by my demeanor, my silence, my composure, my complete lack of emotional reaction. I could see them exchanging glances, trying to figure out this new version of me. They mistook my calm for surrender. They believed my silence was the quiet grief of the defeated. They thought that after a few days of sulking, I would get over it, just like I always did. They had no idea that my mind was already miles away, working with the cold, methodical precision of the woman I used to be. The woman who organized complex legal cases, who cross-referenced evidence, who knew that every victory depended on the strength of your documentation. They thought I was mourning the end of our family, but I was simply planning the end of their comfortable life. After the last gift was unwrapped, I stood up. "If you'll excuse me," I said to the room at large. "There's something I need to take care of in the basement." Chloe looked up, a flicker of alarm in her eyes. "The basement? Mom, it's Christmas. What could you possibly need down there?" I gave her a small, thin smile. It did not reach my eyes. "Just some old paperwork I need to find." They watched me as I walked out of the room, their faces a mixture of pity and confusion. They thought my mind was finally slipping, that I was retreating into the eccentricities of old age. They had no idea I was walking toward the one place in this house they had never valued. The place where they had stored my memories as clutter. The place where my husband and I had kept every deed, every contract, every secret. The place that held every weapon I would need to dismantle their little coop before the New Year's ball ever had a chance to drop. The basement stairs creaked under my weight, a familiar protest that echoed in the heavy silence. A single bare bulb cast long shadows over the landscape of my discarded life. There was the armchair my husband had loved, its familiar floral pattern now gray with a fine layer of dust. Stacks of my books were piled in a corner, their spines warped by the damp. And there, leaning against the wall, was the cracked glass of my wedding portrait, my own smiling face looking out from a past that felt like another lifetime. This wasn't a basement. It was a tomb, a place where Mark and Chloe sent my memories to die. But I had not come down here to mourn. I had come to excavate. In the far corner, behind a broken treadmill and boxes of their winter clothes, was what remained of my small home office. The desk was buried under their junk, but I wasn't looking for the desk. I was looking for what was under it. I knelt, the cold concrete biting into my knees, and pushed aside a heavy box. And there it was, a heavy, fireproof lockbox, matte, black, and unassuming. They must have seen it 100 times and dismissed it as just another piece of old junk. I reached under the collar of my sweater and pulled out a thin silver chain. A small, tarnished key hung from it, a key I had worn every day for the last 30 years. My husband had given it to me, a silent promise I was only now beginning to understand. With a steady hand, I unlocked the box. The click of the lock was a satisfying metallic sound in the quiet gloom. Inside, the smell of old paper and history greeted me. There were our birth certificates, my husband's honorable discharge from the army, the deed to the house from when we first bought it in 1975, and underneath it all, nestled in a thick leather-bound folder, was the document I was looking for. The title on the front was printed in a crisp, old-fashioned font, the Beatrice and Charles Miller Revocable Living Trust. My fingers remembered the feel of this paper. I had typed up drafts of it myself all those years ago. My husband, Charles, had been a meticulous planner. He didn't trust a simple will. A will can be contested, Beat, he had told me, his voice serious as we sat in our lawyer's office. A trust is an iron fortress. As I read the familiar legal language, the power of his foresight washed over me. Upon his death, I had become the sole, undisputed trustee, the administrator, the one person with absolute authority over every asset within the trust. And the most important asset, the only one that mattered now, was this house. Chloe and Mark were named as beneficiaries. Yes, they would inherit the house upon my death. But the two most important words in the entire document were revocable and trustee. As trustee, I had the power to amend, to change, to revoke any part of the trust at any time, for any reason, without needing anyone's permission. A memory, sharp and vivid, came to me. Charles signing the final page. He looked at me across the mahogany desk, a warm smile on his face. "Now I know you'll always be safe," he said. "This house is your fortress, Beatrice. Don't ever let anyone take it from you." Tears welled in my eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude. This document was his last gift to me. It was the love of a good man reaching across the years to protect me when I needed it most. It was the weapon he had left behind for me to defend myself. And their plan, their cruel, pathetic little plan to have me declared incompetent, I almost laughed. A legal secretary with 40 years of experience declared incompetent? They would need more than the advice of Mark's father's lawyer. They would need an army. And even then, this trust was designed to be a shield against exactly that kind of attack. It was all laid out, clause by clause. My fortress was even stronger than I remembered. My mind, once clouded with pain, was now a beacon of clarity. The path forward was not emotional, it was procedural. Step 1, amend the trust to remove Chloe and Mark as beneficiaries. Their inheritance, the future they were so eager to claim, would vanish with the stroke of a pen. Step 2, remove them from the property. They were not tenants, they had no lease. But to make it airtight, to leave them no legal loophole, a formal eviction was the cleanest, most decisive way. I rummaged through the folder and found a business card clipped to the front of the trust. It was not for our old family lawyer. It was for a service I had used many times in my professional life. a service for emergencies and urgent matters. Mobile notary public, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I sat back on my heels in the dim light of the basement, the powerful document in one hand and the small, unassuming business card in the other. Faintly from upstairs, I could hear the sound of the television and a burst of laughter. They were enjoying their Christmas, content in their belief that they had broken me, that they had already won. Down here, surrounded by the history they had tried to erase, I was about to teach them a lesson in legal history, a lesson about the difference between a house and a home. They lived in my house, but they had forgotten it was my home. I pulled out my phone, my fingers steady as I dialed the number on the card. The time for sorrow was over. The time for procedure had begun. The voice on the other end of the line was professional and awake despite the early hour of Christmas morning. Mobile notary, this is Maria speaking. How can I help you? I didn't hesitate. Using the calm, clear tone I had once used to schedule depositions and court filings, I stated my needs. Good morning, Maria. My name is Beatrice Miller. I require a notary at my residence as soon as possible to witness and certify two legal documents. I gave her my address and confirmed the fee. She said she could be there in 1 hour, 7 a.m. perfect. Mark was never awake before 9, especially not on a holiday. After I hung up, a profound sense of calm settled over me. There was no fear, no doubt, just the quiet hum of a machine that has been set in motion. I did not spend the hour pacing. I went to my desk and pulled out 2 sheets of my finest stationery, the kind I reserved for important correspondence. My hands, which had trembled with shock the night before, were now perfectly steady. Drawing on 4 decades of legal experience, I began to write. First, the amendment to the Revocable Living Trust. The language was simple, direct, and legally airtight. I, Beatrice Miller, as sole trustee, do hereby amend the list of beneficiaries, removing Chloe Miller and Mark Thompson, effective immediately. The inheritance they had been so eager to steal was gone, vanished into thin air with a few strokes of my pen. The second document was harder but necessary, the notice to vacate. I stated the facts plainly. They were to vacate the premises at my address within 30 days by order of the property owner and trustee. I cited their hostile and abusive behavior as the cause, creating a paper trail that would protect me if they decided to challenge it. This wasn't a mother asking her children to leave. This was a property owner exercising her legal rights. Just as I finished, I saw the headlights of a small car pull into my driveway. A woman with a professional demeanor and a heavy briefcase stood at my door. Ms. Davis. I led her to the kitchen table, the site of my humiliation, and prepared to turn it into the site of my liberation. She laid out her ledger and her official seal, her movements crisp and efficient. As I watched her press the stamp into the ink pad, I felt a sense of power I hadn't felt in years. This was the world I understood, a world of rules, of laws, of cause and consequence. With Ms. Davis as my witness, I signed the first document. My signature, once shaky, was now firm and resolute. I felt the invisible chains of obligation and unreciprocated love fall away. I was no longer their mother in that moment. I was Beatrice Miller, a woman of sound mind and firm resolve. Then I signed the second, the eviction notice. It was not an act of anger. It was an act of survival, a necessary amputation to save myself from the disease of their greed. Ms. Davis carefully notarized each signature, her official stamp pressing into the paper with a satisfying thud. The documents were now legally binding, irreversible. She packed her briefcase, I paid her fee, and she was gone as quietly as she had arrived. The entire transaction took less than 15 minutes. I stood alone in my kitchen, the first rays of Christmas morning light streaming through the window. In my hands, I held 2 pieces of paper. One was a shield, the other was a sword. I took the eviction notice and folded it neatly, slipping it into a crisp white envelope. In my clearest cursive, I wrote 2 names on the front, Mark and Chloe. I walked over to the counter. I looked at the coffee machine, the expensive, top-of-the-line model they had bought themselves with my credit card last year. It was the first place Mark went every single morning. I placed the envelope directly in front of it, propped up against the sugar bowl. It was impossible to miss. A single white envelope sitting in the heart of my home. It looked so innocent, so small, but I knew it was a declaration of independence, a time bomb, a final answer to the question of who was in charge of this house. I turned and walked back to my bedroom, the scent of fresh coffee already beginning to fill the air. Their Christmas was over. Their free ride had come to a screeching, final halt. They just didn't know it yet. All that was left to do now was wait for the sounds of my quiet, peaceful morning to be shattered by the explosion I knew was just a few short hours away. I sat in my armchair, a novel open in my lap. The house was slowly coming to life around me. I heard the shower run, then the soft padding of my grandson Michael's feet as he went to play with his new toys. Outside, the morning was bright and cold, the kind of perfect, still Christmas day that usually filled me with a quiet joy. Today, it filled me with a quiet anticipation. I was not reading, I was listening. At precisely 9:13, I heard the familiar heavy tread of my son-in-law making his way to the kitchen. It was a sound I used to dread, the sound of the day's first demand about to be made. Today, it was the sound of a countdown timer reaching zero. I heard the click and whir of the coffee machine. Then a pause, a silence that stretched just a second too long. It was the sound of a mind failing to comprehend what it was seeing. The silence was broken by the sharp rip of an envelope being torn open. I imagined him standing there in his pajamas, his face slack with confusion. Then I heard a short, choked sound. It wasn't a laugh, not quite. It was a bark of pure disbelief. Chloe, his voice was a harsh roar that cut through the morning's peace. Get in here, you've got to see this. I heard Chloe's hurried footsteps, her concerned murmurs. What is it, Mark? What's wrong? There was the rustle of paper changing hands, another silence, this one followed by a sharp, horrified gasp from my daughter. Oh my God, she whispered. The disbelief finally curdled into rage. The footsteps were no longer walking, they were stomping. A furious, thundering sound that shook the old floorboards of the hallway, coming directly towards my room. My bedroom door, which had always been a private space, was thrown open with such force that it slammed against the wall, rattling the pictures in their frames. Mark stood in the doorway, wild animal in human form. His face was a blotchy, furious red. The eviction notice was crumpled in his fist. Chloe hovered behind him, her face pale and streaked with fresh tears. What is this? He snarled, waving the paper at me. Is this some kind of sick, senile joke? I did not flinch. I slowly, deliberately placed my bookmark between the pages of my novel and set it down on the table beside me. I folded my hands in my lap. I said nothing. My silence was like gasoline on his fire. He stormed into my room, invading my sanctuary. You can't do this. You can't just kick us out. This is our home. Chloe grew up here. Mom, please, Chloe sobbed, stepping around him. How could you do this to us on Christmas Day of all days? You're destroying our family. Destroying the family? Mark laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. She is the family. We are the ones who have been looking after her. Who do you think keeps this big, empty house from falling apart? Who keeps you from being a lonely old woman rattling around in the dark? This is how you repay us. They stood before me, a tempest of manufactured outrage and genuine panic. He was the accuser, the bully, trying to intimidate me into backing down with pure volume and rage. She was the professional victim, her tears a well-practiced tool of emotional manipulation. For years, this exact combination had worked on me. His anger would frighten me, and her tears would make me feel guilty. I would always be the one to apologize, to smooth things over, to give them what they wanted just to restore the peace. But I was not the same woman they had known yesterday. I just sat there in my armchair and watched them. I watched the way Mark's hands shook with fury. I watched the way Chloe's tears were carefully aimed to make me feel like a monster. I listened to their accusations, their threats, their pathetic attempts to rewrite history and paint themselves as my saviors. They were expecting me to cry, to argue, to defend myself. They were expecting a fight. What they were not expecting was a mirror. My silence was a mirror, reflecting their own ugliness back at them, and it was driving them mad. Think about Michael, Chloe cried, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. Your grandson, you're making your own grandson homeless for Christmas. What kind of grandmother does that? I finally moved. I picked up my reading glasses from the table and began to slowly polish the lenses with a soft cloth. This small, calm, ordinary action seemed to enrage Mark more than any shouting match ever could. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over me. His voice dropped to a low, threatening growl. "You've lost your mind, Beatrice. That's what this is. You're not fit to make decisions anymore. Maybe that lawyer was right. Maybe it is time we stepped in to manage things for you." He had finally said it, the threat out in the open. He was trying to see if it would still work. He finished his tirade, his chest heaving. Chloe's sobs had subsided into choked whimpers. The room was filled with the acrid smell of their desperation. They had thrown every weapon they had at me, and I had not moved an inch. They stood there, breathless and furious, waiting for my response. Well, Mark finally yelled, his voice cracking. "Are you going to say something? You can't just sit there. Explain this." I finished polishing my glasses and slowly put them on. The world came into sharp, clear focus. I looked at Mark's furious, pleading face, and then at my daughter's, which was a mess of tears and panic. They were waiting for an explanation, for a negotiation, for a way to rewind time and get their comfortable lives back. I was about to inform them that no such path existed. My voice, when I finally spoke, was not loud. It did not tremble. It was the calmest sound in the room. "There is nothing to explain," I said simply. "The document in your hand is a legal notice. It means exactly what it says. You have 30 days to vacate my home." Mark sputtered, momentarily losing his footing. "Your home? This is our home. We live here." "No," I corrected him gently. "You have been living here. There is a difference. You have been guests, and your visit is now over." "Mom, you can't be serious," Chloe wept. "We have nowhere to go. You'd really throw your own family out on the street?" This was the moment, the final desperate pull on my heartstrings, the last attempt to wield the power of motherhood against me. I held up a single hand, a quiet gesture for silence. To my own surprise, they both stopped talking. Their mouths hung open. They were finally, truly listening. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment longer before I let the final blade fall. I turned my gaze from Mark and fixed it on my daughter. My voice remained soft, but it carried an edge of cold, hard steel. "Chloe, last night was a difficult night for me. After you all went to bed, I couldn't sleep. I was upset. I went downstairs to get a glass of water around 2 in the morning." I watched her face as I spoke, saw the first flicker of dawning horror in her eyes. She knew what was coming. The house was so quiet. I continued, my voice a serene, level narrative, and as I walked past your room, I heard you talking. I didn't mean to listen, but your voices carried. You were discussing me. Mark's face went from red to a sickly pale white. Chloe looked like she was about to faint. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I simply recited their own words back to them like a court stenographer reading back testimony. I believe the plan was to have me declared incompetent. The legal term you were discussing was a conservatorship. You were going to tell a judge that I was forgetful, a danger to myself. I paused, letting the weight of their conspiracy fill the room, because I am, and I'm quoting your husband now, Chloe, a stubborn old woman who is in the way. And once you had control of my assets, you were going to sell my house, this house, buy a place for yourselves on the lake, and put me in a nice, clean facility. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of guilt, of discovery, of utter and complete defeat. There was no more yelling, no more crying, no more accusations. There was only the ugly, naked truth lying exposed on the floor between us. They had been caught. Their secret, vicious little plan was no longer a secret. Chloe made a small, wounded sound in the back of her throat and covered her face with her hands, her body shaking with real, genuine sobs of shame. Mark just stood there speechless, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from the water. All the fight, all the arrogant bluster had drained out of him, leaving behind the small, frightened man he had always been. I stood up from my armchair. The action was final. The audience was over. "So you see," I said, my voice as calm as ever, "there is nothing to discuss. The eviction notice stands. The trust has been amended. This is no longer your home, and I am no longer your safety net." I walked past them out of my own bedroom, leaving them standing there like statues in the wreckage of the future they had so arrogantly tried to steal from me. They finally understood the game was not just over. They had never even been playing. What they didn't understand yet was that this was not the end of their problems. It was only the beginning. Their comfortable, subsidized world had just been pulled out from under them, and the harsh, cold reality of what a life built on greed and disrespect actually costs was about to come crashing down on them with a force they could never have imagined. The 30 days that followed were the longest and quietest I had ever experienced in my own home. The explosive confrontation on Christmas morning had given way to a tense, suffocating truce. Mark and Chloe moved through the house like ghosts, their voices reduced to hushed, urgent whispers behind their closed bedroom door. They avoided me, their eyes darting away whenever I entered a room. The grand performance of being a happy family was over. All that was left was the awkward, miserable reality of strangers living under the same roof. I did not engage. I did not gloat. I simply went about my days. I drank my tea. I read my books. I tended to my winter garden. I was a rock in the middle of their frantic, churning river of panic, and my stillness was a constant, unnerving reminder of their deadline. From my quiet corner, I watched their world unravel. I would hear snippets of their desperate phone calls. Mark, his voice stripped of its usual bravado, pleading with a bank representative. "What do you mean my credit score is too low? There must be a mistake." I heard him get denied for 3 different loans in a single afternoon. The man who had planned to sell my $600,000 home didn't have enough credit to be approved for a $2,000 personal loan. Chloe tried a different tactic. She attempted to appeal to a past that no longer existed. One afternoon, I came into the living room to find a scrapbook of old family photos left open on the coffee table. Pictures of her as a little girl, of me and her at her high school graduation, of all of us at Michael's first birthday. It was a clumsy, transparent attempt at emotional warfare. I looked at the photos, felt a brief pang of sadness for the girl she used to be, and then closed the book and put it back on the shelf. I would not allow my memories to be used as a weapon against me. The true humiliation came about a week before their deadline. I was in the kitchen when I overheard Mark on the phone in the next room. His voice was different. The anger was gone. The arrogance was gone. It was the small, pleading voice of a child. He was talking to his father. "Dad, I know, I know. I should have saved more," he mumbled into the receiver. "But things just got away from us. We have nowhere to go. Chloe is a wreck. Can we just stay with you for a little while? Just until we get back on our feet." There was a long pause. I could imagine Arthur on the other end, his disappointment a heavy weight on the line. The son who had tried to honor him by displacing me was now coming to him as a beggar. "No, I understand," Mark said, his voice cracking. "I know it's a lot to ask." He hung up the phone, and for the first time in the years I had known him, I heard the sound of my son-in-law crying. They didn't move in with his parents. Arthur and Jean co-signed a lease for them, but that was all. On the 30th day, a small, battered moving truck pulled into my driveway. The sky was a bleak, unforgiving gray, a perfect reflection of the occasion. Watching them pack was a pathetic sight. The giant television, the cold gray sofa, the expensive coffee machine, all of it looked cheap and out of place as they hauled it out of the home they had tried to claim as their own. I watched from my bedroom window as my grandson Michael carried a small box of his toys to the truck. He stopped at the end of the driveway and looked back at the house, his face a sad, confused portrait. Of all of us, he was the only true victim. My heart ached for him, but I knew that staying in a toxic home, watching his father disrespect his grandmother, was no childhood for him either. This was a painful but necessary surgery. I stayed at the window, watching them pack. It was a pathetic sight. The giant television, the cold gray sofa, the expensive coffee machine, all of it looked cheap and out of place as they hauled it out of the home they had tried to claim as their own. The sight of my husband's armchair and my old bookcase being brought back up from the basement by the movers brought a quiet, fierce joy to my chest. It felt like they were bringing a part of my soul back to me. The movers set the armchair in its rightful place in the living room. It looked so comfortable, so warm, so right. After they finished loading the truck, Mark came to the front door. He didn't knock. He just stood there, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders hunched. He looked up at my bedroom window. I did not move. Our eyes met for a long moment. There was no anger left in his gaze, only a hollow defeat. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of his loss, and then turned and walked away. Chloe came a few minutes later. She stood on the porch, staring at the front door. She didn't look up at the window. She just stood there, her body sagging with an exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical labor and everything to do with a life built on deceit and laziness. She looked like a child who had just been scolded and had no one to run to. She lifted her hand to knock, then hesitated, her hand suspended in the air. For a moment, a brief, fleeting moment, I thought she might say something, anything, but she didn't. She lowered her hand, turned, and got into the passenger seat of the truck without a single word. The small, battered truck pulled out of my driveway, turning onto the street and disappearing around the corner. The silence that was left behind was vast and echoing. For a few days, it felt like loneliness. But then I began to fill that silence with my own life. A week later, Chloe called me. Her voice was thin, tired. "The apartment is small," she said. "The neighbors are so loud. The landlord won't fix the leaky faucet." She was waiting for me to offer a solution, to offer money, to offer to fix it. I took a deep breath. "I'm sorry to hear that it is difficult, Chloe," I said, my voice kind but firm. "I hope you are able to make it work." I did not offer to help. The Bank of Mom was permanently closed. That night, for the first time in 3 years, I walked through every room of my home. The air was different. The silence was no longer heavy with resentment and things left unsaid. It was a clean, peaceful silence, a silence that sounded like freedom. The echoes of their chaos had finally faded. The consequences of their choices were now their burden to bear, in a small apartment with a leaky faucet. And the consequences of my own choice, my decision to fight back, were all around me. It was the beautiful, quiet, and finally undivided peace of my own home. My home. The word had a new, powerful meaning. I was finally, truly home. 6 months have passed since that Christmas. Winter has melted away, and my garden is bursting with the defiant colors of spring. I am sitting on my porch, a place I haven't truly enjoyed in years, with a warm cup of tea in my hands. The air is sweet with the scent of blooming hyacinths and freshly cut grass. For the first time in a very long time, the house behind me feels entirely my own. It is not a battlefield. It is not a boarding house. It is a sanctuary. After they left, the silence they left behind was vast and echoing. For a few days, it felt like loneliness. But then I began to fill that silence with my own life. I took my husband's armchair out of the dusty basement and had it professionally cleaned and restored. It now sits in its rightful place in the living room, a warm and welcoming presence. My wedding portrait hangs above the fireplace, the cracked glass replaced. My husband's smile once again watches over the home he loved. I reclaimed my space piece by piece, memory by memory. I have found that my life, once shrunk to fit the needs of others, has expanded in ways I never expected. I joined a book club and I now host a small group of wonderful, vibrant women here every other Wednesday. Our laughter fills these rooms in a way I had forgotten was possible. I took a trip to the coast, something I had always wanted to do, and walked along the ocean at sunrise. I sent my grandson Michael a postcard from every town I visited. My relationship with him is the one piece I was determined to salvage from the wreckage. I see him every Thursday. Chloe drops him off at the curb, and he and I have the afternoon together. We work in the garden. We bake cookies. We talk. He is a good boy with a kind heart, and he deserves a grandmother who is whole and happy. Chloe and I are polite, but the old intimacy is gone. Some things, when they are broken, cannot be put back together in the same way. I love my daughter, but I love myself more. I finally understand that is not a selfish statement. It is a necessary one. Sometimes as I sit here in the quiet of the evening, I think about that night. The fall, the shock, the cold, hard words spoken in the dark. It's a scar, and it will always be a part of me. But it is not a wound that still bleeds. It is a reminder of the strength I forgot I had. They thought they were pushing a weak old woman. They had no idea they were pushing a button that would activate a lifetime of resilience, intelligence, and self-worth that had been lying dormant for far too long. They saw me as a liability. But I have learned that I am my own greatest asset. Today, my peace is my greatest wealth. The journey to find it was harder than I could have ever imagined. But I know I am not the only one who has ever felt invisible in their own life. Every subscription to this channel feels like a vote of support, a message sent out into the world that women like me have a voice and a story worth telling. Please help this community grow. Help us become a stronger, louder chorus for anyone who needs to hear that it is never too late to stand up for yourself. The greatest lesson in all of this is that forgiveness and boundaries are not enemies. I can forgive them for their weakness, for their greed, for their cruelty, but I will never again remove the boundaries that keep me safe. I will never again make myself small to make others feel big. My home is my fortress, just as my husband always intended it to be, and my self-respect is the guardian at the gate. Never let anyone convince you that your worth is negotiable. Never let anyone treat your generosity as an obligation. And never, ever forget that true love does not use you. It values you, it protects you, it honors you. I am 50 years old, and I feel like my life has just begun. My grandson, Michael, is the one piece of this shattered mosaic that I am determined to put back together. He is 7 now, a small boy with the wide, worried eyes of his father, but a kindness and a gentle soul that reminds me so much of my husband. Every Thursday, Chloe drops him off at the curb, and he and I have the afternoon together. Those hours are a sanctuary for us both, a time when the tension and silence of his new home are replaced by the simple, comforting rhythm of ours. We work in the garden, planting seeds, pulling weeds, our hands covered in the same rich earth. We bake cookies, our flour-dusted fingers shaping dough into familiar stars and gingerbread men. We talk. He tells me about school, about his friends, about the strange quiet of their new apartment. And I listen. I listen with a part of my heart that had been closed off for years, a part that is slowly, cautiously reopening for him. Chloe and I are polite, but the old intimacy is gone. The mother-daughter bond that once felt unbreakable is now a fragile thread, stretched thin and frayed at the edges. She still calls, her voice a thin, tired echo of the daughter I once knew. "The apartment is so small, Mom," she'll say. "The neighbors are so loud. The landlord won't fix the leaky faucet." She is still a child, waiting for me to solve her problems, to offer money, to offer comfort, to fix what she has broken. But I have learned a hard, necessary lesson. I have learned that true love does not enable. It sets boundaries. I am kind, but I am firm. I'm sorry to hear that it is difficult, Chloe. I'll say, my voice gentle but with an unyielding steel underneath. I hope you are able to make it work. The bank of Mom is permanently closed. Sometimes she will try a different tactic, one I recognize from her father's playbook. A few weeks ago, she called, her voice full of what she hoped was desperation. "Mom, you don't even miss us. Don't you feel lonely in that big empty house?" I paused, and for a moment I considered lying. Considered giving her the answer she so desperately wanted to hear, the answer that would validate her belief that I was lost without her. But I had made a promise to myself. I would no longer make myself small to make others feel big. "Chloe," I said, my voice as calm as a still pond. "The house is not empty. It's full, full of peace, full of quiet, full of me." A long silence followed, a silence I did not feel the need to fill. I heard a small, sharp gasp on the other end of the line, a sound that told me she finally understood that my life was not just beginning again, it was thriving. I love my daughter, but I love myself more. I finally understand that is not a selfish statement. It is a necessary one. Some things, when they are broken, cannot be put back together in the same way. Our relationship is one of them. It has been shattered and rebuilt with new, stronger materials, materials of self-respect and clear boundaries. As I sit here in the quiet of the evening, I often think about that night. The fall, the shock, the cold, hard words spoken in the dark. It's a scar, and it will always be a part of me. But it is not a wound that still bleeds. It is a reminder of the strength I forgot I had. They thought they were pushing a weak old woman. They had no idea they were pushing a button that would activate a lifetime of resilience, intelligence, and self-worth that had been lying dormant for far too long. They saw me as a liability. But I have learned that I am my own greatest asset. Today, my peace is my greatest wealth. The journey to find it was harder than I could have ever imagined. The greatest lesson in all of this is that forgiveness and boundaries are not enemies. I can forgive them for their weakness, for their greed, for their cruelty, but I will never again remove the boundaries that keep me safe. I will never again make myself small to make others feel big. My home is my fortress, just as my husband always intended it to be, and my self-respect is the guardian at the gate. Never let anyone convince you that your worth is negotiable. Never let anyone treat your generosity as an obligation. And never, ever forget that true love does not use you. It values you, it protects you, it honors you. I am 50 years old, and I feel like my life has just begun. 6 months after they left, the silence of my home no longer felt like a void. It was a canvas, and I was painting on it with the vibrant colors of my own life. Winter had melted away, and the garden I had tended with my grandson was now bursting with defiant blooms. I sat on my porch, a place that for years had felt like a lookout point for the next argument, but which now felt like a throne. The air was sweet with the scent of blooming hyacinths and freshly cut grass, and the only sound was the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. For the first time in a very long time, the house behind me felt entirely my own. It was not a battlefield. It was not a boarding house. It was a sanctuary. I had spent the last half year reclaiming it, piece by piece, memory by memory. I'd taken my husband's armchair from the dusty basement, had it professionally cleaned and restored, and now it sat by the fireplace, a warm and welcoming presence. My wedding portrait with its cracked glass was now back above the mantel, my husband's smile once again watching over the home he loved. My books were back on the shelves, their spines a colorful promise of new adventures. Every corner of the house, once filled with the tension of their presence, now held the quiet peace of my own. I've discovered that my life, once shrunk to fit the needs of others, has expanded in ways I never expected. I joined a book club and now host a small group of wonderful, vibrant women here every other Wednesday. Our laughter fills these rooms in a way I had forgotten was possible. I took a trip to the coast, something I had always wanted to do, and I walked along the ocean at sunrise, feeling the sand between my toes and the salt spray on my face. It was the first time in years I'd felt truly free. I sent my grandson Michael a postcard from every town I visited. My relationship with him is the one piece I was determined to salvage. He still comes over every Thursday. Chloe drops him off at the curb, and he and I have the afternoon together. We work in the garden. We bake cookies. We talk. He is a good boy with a kind heart, and he deserves a grandmother who is whole and happy. Chloe and I are polite, but the old intimacy is gone. I've had to accept that some things, when they are broken, cannot be put back together in the same way. I love my daughter, but I love myself more. I finally understand that this is not a selfish statement. It is a necessary one. Sometimes, as I sit here in the quiet of the evening, I think about that night. The fall, the shock, the cold, hard words spoken in the dark. It's a scar, and it will always be a part of me. But it is not a wound that still bleeds. It is a reminder of the strength I forgot I had. They thought they were pushing a weak old woman. They had no idea they were pushing a button that would activate a lifetime of resilience, intelligence, and self-worth that had been lying dormant for far too long. They saw me as a liability. But I have learned that I am my own greatest asset. Today, my peace is my greatest wealth. The journey to find it was harder than I could have ever imagined, but it has led me to a place of profound gratitude. The greatest lesson in all of this is that forgiveness and boundaries are not enemies. I can forgive them for their weakness, for their greed, for their cruelty, but I will never again remove the boundaries that keep me safe. I will never again make myself small to make others feel big. My home is my fortress, just as my husband always intended it to be, and my self-respect is the guardian at the gate. Never let anyone convince you that your worth is negotiable. Never let anyone treat your generosity as an obligation. And never, ever forget that true love does not use you. It values you, it protects you, it honors you. I am 50 years old and I feel like my life has just begun. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it has given you a sense of hope and a reminder that it is never too late to stand up for yourself. Please take care of your health, cherish your family, and remember to always protect your own peace.